I know what you're thinking. We're talking about Michael Brown yet again, but it's important to go over videos that still perpetuate the lies related to Michael Brown because it's a foundational lie. It is actually the lie that led to the formation of the Black Lives Matter movement, and on top of that, it's a good test of whether or not the subject that you're talking to, the person that you're talking to, no matter what side of the political spectrum they're on, has any honor, any integrity, or any curiosity. People who get the Michael Brown case wrong are missing either one of those three or all of those three because they don't care about the facts, they don't care about the information, even though it's plainly obvious and out there and accessible for everyone, as I've shown multiple times in this video. So yeah, we're going over Michael Brown again, but it's important to go over Michael Brown again. Now, the video we're going over today comes from a YouTube channel called the Serf Times. He has what looks like to be a Twitch setup. I'm not exactly sure if he's a Twitcher. Honestly, I don't really care, but that's generally the setup that he's putting forward. And he's doing a response video to a Larry Elder PragerU video where he supposedly debunks the absurd claims made by Larry Elder. But here's the thing. He debunks nothing, and all he shows is his lack of honor, integrity, or curiosity. One or all of the three is what he's missing, and that's the overall thesis of today. But let's get into the video.
Wilson, driving a police SUV, had just received a call on his radio that a local convenience store had been robbed. He saw two men walking in the middle of the nearby street who met the description of the store thieves. Wilson drove...
Black, walking while black, I think was the description. Yeah, we're looking for a black individual. If you see one, pull them over. See what comes from that.
So right here we have one of the most embarrassing, idiotic, and humiliating lies humanly possible that could ever be told about the Michael Brown case. In the PragerU video, they say that Michael Brown was stopped for matching the description of a suspect of a convenience store robbery. Michael Brown committed that convenience store robbery, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But this guy decides to respond to that assertion of fact, which is a fact-based claim, with Michael Brown was stopped for walking while black. This is a video of Michael Brown committing that convenience store robbery. Not only did Michael Brown match the description of the person who committed the robbery, because that was in fact Michael Brown, but he also had on him, and it was clearly visible, the products that were stolen from the store. This guy says walking while black multiple times throughout the course of the video, as if there is any doubt whatsoever that Michael Brown was the person who robbed this store, and Michael Brown was stopped for being the person who robbed this store. It's not that he just matched the description of just being a black guy, it's that he's the exact person who did the crime, and he has the stolen merchandise on him, and this was shortly after the crime, right near the crime scene. Do you have any curiosity whatsoever? Did you think maybe I should look into this even a little bit before making this absurd assertion that Michael Brown was targeted for the stop due to his race? That's a claim that not even Black Lives Matter makes now. So the next thing that this guy does, after butchering the initial reason for the stop, which he continues to butcher throughout this video, is go to what happened right after the stop. And rather than pulling up any sort of reputable source, he pulls up the Wikipedia for the case so he can read Officer Darren Wilson's account and the person who is provably lying about this case's account and compare and contrast them.
All right, we're going to Wikipedia Andy this for 2 seconds. I know it's kind of cheat sheeting because we've got the test in front of us, so we're going to take the test, but at the same time we're going to learn along the way, so I'm hoping this will... So we've got two different he says going on here. So in one account we have the police officer who's saying that when he asked him to pull over because he was being detained for robbery, in which we do not know yet if he is guilty of that robbery or not, but either way, walking while black, come over here to the car, I need to detain you or at least question you. At which point, Darren Wilson prevented the officer from leaving his vehicle, according to the police account. I don't know about you, and I've heard the tales, okay, of African Americans in the United States, how they're raised from the day they're born by their parents to be very, very cautious about interacting with the police. Even if that wasn't the case, I don't know a lot of people who, when having a conversation with another person, let alone a police officer, will walk up to the car of the vehicle and be like, "You were getting out."
Now, rather than dig any deeper into the proved liar's claims versus Officer Wilson's claims, this guy just decides arbitrarily in a scientific method to split the difference between the two stories in order to assign fault to Officer Darren Wilson. You could really tell how objective and scientific this person is being by the fact that he is already predisposed to blame Officer Wilson, and even his moderate middle ground position is told in such a way where Officer Darren Wilson is at fault.
What makes a lot more sense to me, if I can Occam's razor this a little bit, is the story that perhaps there was a bit of police brutality involved. It was a little bit unjust in that he grabbed Michael Brown by the neck, at which point he shot him, according to the other testimony. Now, if you want to cut this in the middle, so let's say the truth lies somewhere in the center between the two, we've got two opposing testimonies. Even then, if Michael Brown, say, was like, you stay in your car, sir, and didn't physically stop him from doing it, but we'll just say, we'll cut it in the middle, you stay in your car, sir, and as a result, Darren pulled his gun out and just whipped it at his head. So that's basically, we'll cut it down the middle. Even then, I think most people would agree that's outrageous.
Now, the great thing about this case is you don't have to assert what you believe to be true. You don't have to pick a side and decide who is telling the truth. You can actually pull up, and this is public and it's easy to read, the Department of Justice report on the Michael Brown shooting. And I know it looks a little daunting. It's a whole 80 plus pages, and honestly, I could tell if that's just too much to read for you. But luckily, you don't even have to get through 80 pages to figure out who's telling the truth in the Wilson versus Brown stories. And the reason why you don't have to go through that is because the summary of evidence starts at around page 6 and it concludes on page 8. So all you have to do to know who's telling the truth is be able to read a table of contents, be able to go to the forensic section and compare and contrast whose story matches up with the forensic evidence. And what you find out when you do that is Officer Darren Wilson told the truth and Michael Brown's lying friend was lying. Wilson asserts that he attempted to cut off Brown in traffic when he was crossing the street because he matched the description of a robbery suspect at a local convenience store. Video surveillance tells us that the person who robbed the convenience store was in fact Michael Brown. He attempted to open the door and Brown shoved the door closed. This is supported by the DNA evidence of Michael Brown on the door of Officer Darren Wilson. Then Brown reached into the car, punching Wilson, and started going for his gun. This is supported by a bruise on Officer Darren Wilson's cheek and scratch marks on his neck, the part of his face that was facing the driver's side window where Michael Brown reached in to punch him. Then, because Officer Darren Wilson was buckled in his car, he went to reach for a weapon, but he couldn't get any other weapon but his gun, so he goes to grab his gun. So then Michael Brown reached for the gun and they began fighting over it before a shot was discharged. Now, you can argue that maybe the other witness said that Officer Wilson reached out of the car and he fired the gun like that, but the forensic evidence shows us that the gun was fired within the car, and it shows us that Brown was reaching for the gun, because Brown had GSR on his palm where he was struck by the bullet. Not only that, Brown also had indications of a burn from the muzzle of the gun, which can only happen if Brown's hand is within inches of the muzzle of the gun when it fired. Not only that, but the bullet that left Michael Brown's palm was embedded in the driver's side door panel, and the angle of the shot completely supports Officer Darren Wilson firing from inside his car right where his holster was, which is what he told investigators in his initial statements. This is not a dispute. This is not a split the difference and then come to your own conclusion kind of story. This is an objective fact. This is what happened in the car. Not one, not two, but 3 different autopsies concluded that Michael Brown was shot in this way and the bullet was embedded in the door panel. Not 1, but 2, but 3 investigations concluded that Michael Brown punched Wilson and reached for his gun. This is indisputable.
18-year-old kid running from you, of course, running from you because you're threatening to kill him because he was stopped again for walking while black. And you're going to say stop or I'll shoot. What would your first reaction be? I think the natural thing that every single human being would do instantly. I mean, it's a guttural thing. It's almost visceral. You know, it's like, holy shit, I'm about to be shot. Freem! And then you go right in there. Like, go for the head. Go. Haven't every single one.
Now, the next thing that this guy tries to debunk is the idea that Michael Brown ran away, then turned around at some point and came back charging against Officer Darren Wilson. Now, he tries to debunk this with no evidence whatsoever, but just by saying, "That's absurd, who would do that?" leaving out the key details that yes, after he struggled for Officer Darren Wilson's gun, he decided to run away. Officer Darren Wilson pursued him. When Brown realized that he was not going to get away from Officer Wilson, he turned around and began to charge Officer Darren Wilson. His first instinct was to fight him, then it was flight, then it was fight again. Now, while I am speculating on the motives of one Michael Brown in that scenario, what I am not speculating on is the fact that Michael Brown ran east 180 feet away from the vehicle, was pursued by Wilson, then turned and ran towards Wilson about 21 feet. The reason I'm not speculating on that is because, again, that is something that is an ironclad fact proven by the forensic evidence. Remember, Brown was shot in the vehicle, meaning he was bleeding from his hand when he was running away, and when he turned and returned to charge at Wilson. That meant he was dripping blood. He was dripping blood further away from Wilson than where he was before the shots began firing again. And remember, this isn't something that I'm speculating. This isn't me arbitrarily picking a point between a proven liar and somebody whose testimony is supported by the forensic evidence and saying that's probably what happened. This is me going with the forensic evidence and the autopsy results, and not one autopsy, not two autopsies, but 3 different autopsies that show Brown was moving toward Wilson when shot. So to review, Brown was stopped after he committed the robbery. He was stopped for being the person who committed the robbery and having evidence of the robbery visible and on his person at the time that he was stopped. Brown pushed the door open and then proceeded to punch Officer Darren Wilson and reach for his gun. This is indisputable by the forensic evidence. Then Brown ran west 180 feet. Wilson pursued, and then Brown turned around and charged Officer Darren Wilson, closing the gap to a little bit over 2 feet, according to the Department of Justice report. This is not a hard case. It's not a hard call to make. Anybody who's putting forward the myth of Mike Brown should be shamed and ridiculed for being a complete and total fraud. And honestly, ignorance is not a good enough excuse in order to put forward the myth of Michael Brown, because the movement is called Black Lives Matter, and if your position is that you care more about Black lives than other people in the United States of America, the bare minimum that you should be able to do is read 8 pages of the Department of Justice report about how exactly this Black life ended.
Witnesses described him saying, "The police shot my friend and his hands were up." And like a game of telephone, the phrase spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, morphing into...
But wait, why are you dismissing his testimony? Do you understand that in a court of law, as we're bringing up all these documents, the testimony is still credible evidence? Like, that's part of what... And yeah, if one other party was like, yeah, beside me, he said that, and then it spread around, probably because that was the testimony of one of the key witnesses, the other person who was there, the non-cop.
Now, another absurd point made in this video is that somehow the police and or the Department of Justice, or really both, were dismissive of witnesses that were not police officers in order to get to the answer that they wanted. The Department of Justice report talks specifically about why they dismissed certain witnesses. First and foremost, a bunch of witnesses that were initially saying that Michael Brown had his hands up and he surrendered and he didn't do anything wrong and Officer Darren Wilson was an evil white racist that just killed him for no reason, didn't want to talk to the FBI and admitted that they were told to say that by people and not actually witnesses. The reason they didn't want to talk to the FBI and tell the FBI their fake stories is because lying to the FBI is a crime. Furthermore, they dismissed other witnesses, like Michael Brown's friend, for saying things that directly contradicted the forensic evidence. If you claim that Brown's torso was never in the window of Officer Darren Wilson's police car, and that is directly contradicted by the forensic evidence, you are a proven liar. If you claim that Officer Wilson never fired from within his SUV and actually had his arm out of his window, and there's a bullet embedded in the door panel of Officer Darren Wilson's SUV, that's how they determine you to be a liar. The Department of Justice investigation into the Brown shooting began within 2 days of the shooting. So the FBI and the Department of Justice people were essentially shadowing the Ferguson Police Department every step of the way through the investigation and retesting all the forensic evidence that the local police department was testing in order to assess what happened. This is the ideal scenario to get to the truth of the matter when conducting a homicide investigation. And that's what occurred. Furthermore, Barack Obama embarrassed himself at the UN when he basically apologized for the actions of the local police in Ferguson and essentially took the side of the Michael Brown family. So if anybody had an incentive to skew the results of this investigation, it would be the Department of Justice to do in such a way that would not embarrass Barack Obama. But they did the work, they went over the forensics, and they proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. We usually never get somebody being proven innocent beyond a reasonable doubt, but that's exactly what happened in the Officer Darren Wilson Mike Brown case. Oh, and by the way, one more thing. Michael Brown in no way, shape, or form had his hands up. When your hands are up and you're facing this way, like Michael Brown was alleged to do by known liars, you can't get entrance wounds in your forearms like this. This is a running motion. That's why he's shown in the graphic in the running motion. Also, Brown's other hand was holding up his pants, balled up into a fist. So he got shots here on this forearm. This is completely inconsistent with Michael Brown having his hands up and surrendering to Officer Darren Wilson. This is an indisputable open and shut case. The minority of witnesses that dispute Officer Darren Wilson's account are either proven liars via the forensic evidence or admitted liars, people who say that they switched their testimony either under pressure or they weren't even at the shooting. The overwhelming majority of witnesses support Officer Darren Wilson's account, and their testimony, more importantly, happens to be aligned with the forensic evidence.
I think the median income of a black family in the United States is going to be $0 by 2054. So it's not as if things are ameliorating. And the reason I bring up income and the fact that the average black family will have $0 in assets by that point.
Now, on a side note, the Serf Times for some reason says that in 2040 or 2050, I don't remember at the time I'm recording this, black people's average income will be $0. I think he means wealth, but it's still hilarious for him to make this argument that in 2050, black people will not be able to earn income within the United States of America. That's about the same level of thinking I would expect from somebody who still, in 2020, asserts that Michael Brown was innocent. But those are just my thoughts, and in reality, these are actually not thoughts, they're not even opinions. Those are the facts of the Michael Brown case. Let me know what you think about those facts down in the comments below. As usual, if you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Support me via the support links. Buy my t-shirt, it's a new design. I want you guys to get it. I think it's awesome. Till next time.